Welcome to Celluloid Citizens, a podcast about film. I'm Brian O'Connell.
And I'm Sean M. Thompson.
And today we'll be talking about a 2015 war drama by Cary Fukunaga. He wrote, produced, directed, and shot it. It's called Beasts of No Nation, and it stars Idris Elba, Abraham Attah, Ama K. Abrizi. I'm going to mispronounce all of these names in advance.
It's all right.
Grace Nordy, David Donto, and Opeyemi. I'm just going to butcher that, but it's a great cast.
Everyone does a really good job.
It's quite an intense experience of a film, I feel we should say, going in, and there will be spoilers.
Yeah, like as I told Brian, I say enjoy it, but I don't know that you really enjoy a film like Beasts of No Nation. Like, you appreciate the cinematography.
Oh, yes.
And all of the technical prowess, but like the plot is so draining. And just, it's a war drama about child soldiers in Africa.
It was odd. I felt like earlier in this week I watched Solo as well. So on the one hand, I felt both fortunate to have seen that, so my nerves were steeled. I've had my full share of atrocity in film this week. But on the other hand, these types of movies, they grind you down. And this is an unforgiving experience in general.
It's totally unforgiving. I would say, without hyperbole, one of the most brutal films I've ever seen. Not necessarily in terms of like gore or graphic violence, but just in terms of watching the human spirit be like crushed under a boot heel.
Yes. It's like not literally, but it feels like a relentless act of child abuse, which is what it's depicting through the lens of civil conflict.
Right, and a lot of the time it is also literal.
Yes, no, literally.
We will get into that.
But I guess a plot summary is in order, because this is a film that has has a definite structure to it and a definite arc. It's set in West Africa, not in a specific country or during a specific war. So I think that lends it a sort of, I don't want to say universality because it is specific to this region of the world, but it's not taking place during a specific conflict that's ever clearly outlined for us. And it follows a young boy named Agu, who is living in a village with his family, his parents, and his siblings. And during a civil war, the army comes to their village and basically slaughters his entire family mercilessly.
And that's the start of the movie.
That's the very start of the movie. And it is not the hardest scene to watch. It gets much worse.
It gets much worse, but Fukunaga does a good job of showing you this war-torn part of West Africa, but of showing people happy in it, showing Agu, with his family, and like things are messed up, but he's clearly, still being a little boy and like getting into trouble and just having fun.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We've already used words like unforgiving and merciless and brutal, but there is, and I think this is important, there is a lot of warmth and, I don't want to say heart, but, there's a lot of humanism to this film that you don't always get with movies that are dabbling with this type of extremity.
No, I think of something like Apocalypse Now, and it doesn't really have anywhere near the warmth of Beasts of No Nation.
No, it's very... the comparison that occurred to me, most obviously, because I saw it this year, and it also involves a child, the effects of war on a child, was Come and See, which is a 1985 Soviet-Russian movie about the Nazi invasion of Belarus. And it is also telling the story of a child very similar to Agu, who gets wrapped up in this conflict that utterly destroys his life and his experience. But unlike that film, there's always I hesitate to use the word heart, but there is something like genuine and human in this film that I don't think you get with Come and See, which is very cold and angry. This film is very inviting in some ways, despite the extremity of the situation.
It is, and I imagine that's a hard act to pull off because it is so brutal. And I could see people maybe thinking, well, will it confuse the audience if we have these moments of levity, if we have this child, bonding with a fellow child soldier, or if we have them playing soccer, or this moment? But
yeah,
Fukunaga just didn't care and did it anyway, and I think the film is stronger for it.
And I would also credit a lot of that to the lead performance of the child, Abraham. Where was it? Abraham Attah.
Abraham Attah. Yeah, he is a powerhouse of an actor. Like, Idris Elba has his chops, and when there's a child at times out acting him, like, that's a talented performer.
It's crazy. And I mean, especially since really terrible child actors are very common in film. With a film like this, it's like, it's all on the performance of the kid. If you don't...
Yeah, I mean, they kind of had to get, like, a powerhouse child actor, because this movie wouldn't have worked if they didn't have a really brilliant performer as the child star.
And they have him. He's absolutely amazing and really sells you on this emotional journey or emotional mutilation that occurs to him across the film.
Yeah, a lot of this film, and rightly so, deals with trauma.
Oh, yes.
And how people deal with trauma, and specifically how a child would deal with trauma.
Yeah, and in that case, to pick up the plot summary a little bit, after his village is destroyed, he escapes and gets taken in by a rebel faction called the Native Defense Forces, which is run, at least this rank of it is run by Idris Elba, who plays the commandant. And this, I mean, to talk about performances, Idris Elba is just flat out incredible in this movie as well.
You can tell he did a good job because he's portraying like literally the worst, like one of the worst people in film. He just all across the board bad.
And that must be hard for Idris Elba because Idris Elba, like I watch interviews with him,
charismatic.
He's so charming, he's wonderful.
But he taps into that though. The thing that's brilliant about his performance as the commandant is like you see why people would follow him. Because he is very charismatic and he does have these rousing speeches and he does make you sort of like get on his side in terms of just being like, oh, wow, like, yeah, like they're in the right. They should be fighting back. But then with his actions, he shows that he doesn't necessarily care about justice. He kind of just wants power.
When you first meet him, you know something is up, but he provides definitely a sort of a home and a camaraderie for these people that they wouldn't otherwise have, that have been are justifiably angry at the military that has killed their family members and friends, and provides them with like some sort of communal experience, but it really quickly goes into outright like cult behavior and most disturbingly instances of sexual abuse and forced drug use for these children.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of screwed up stuff, and we'll probably go back into the chronological plot. But one of the first moments where the film, I think, really takes a turn is when Idris Elba basically molests Agu. He brings him into his office, and then it cuts, and Agu is leaving, and he's clearly traumatized. And I think that's one of the first big turns, which is impressive considering it's a movie where a kid's whole family is murdered in the first like half an hour.
Yeah.
And yet this moment is still just so, because it's like this kid is finally, even though he's in this screwed up situation where he's a child soldier now, he sort of has this camaraderie with his fellow soldiers and he feels like he's got a place.
Yeah.
And a purpose.
And that's just taken away.
And then that is even just taken away.
And the most awful thing about it is it's preceded, the scene that immediately precedes this moment is Idris Elba gives him a pep talk, like, and is being super encouraging, and you kind of see why people are, attracted to this. I mean, I don't know if attracted is the right word, but would center them, would follow this man essentially, and then he just immediately betrays that trust with like a horrible, heinous act.
And he does he does these horrible types of things throughout the entire film.
There are many. I mean, we could play a game of which is the hardest scene to watch, and we're not going to. But preceding that,
right, because it's kind of a fool's errand. They're all hard to watch. It's a hard movie to watch.
Yeah, it's very, very, very difficult to watch. But a scene that precedes the molestation, which really, like, I was like, it's again not even that graphic, but I was flinching from the screen.
And that's all in the performances, yeah. And Idris Elba, who's this kind of like, he kind of frames it as like it's another chore you have to do to be in this army. Like it's just another thing you have to do.
One of those things includes hacking an innocent man to death with a machete, and that was maybe, again, not ranking the scenes in any way, but that was up there with the most absolutely like brutal things I've had to watch on screen. That they have kidnapped this man or detained him from his car, and they tie him up on the ground, and the commandant tells Agu to kill him with a machete, and this man is just pleading for help, but Idris Elba really shouldn't refer to him as Idris Elba, but this character,
the commandant, he keeps telling Agu, like, this is the man that murdered your family, and the man is saying stuff like, I'm just an engineer, like, I'm not in this army, and like, I'm not a soldier.
That scene spoke very powerfully to me, because it's a thing you see like at its most extreme in ideologies like fascism or totalitarianism, but in some sense you see it in all war, that you're being trained to view this person as not a human being and just identify them with this anonymous enemy.
Right. There's a lot of separating things into black and white and getting rid of the gray areas, because there's so much gray with this. Like, this man is clearly not a soldier. I think he is an engineer.
He has nothing. He just happened
to be along to do some kind of bridge work or something.
He has nothing to do. I mean, even if he was a soldier, he has nothing to do with the specific trauma, which is an awful trauma, but the specific trauma that happened to Agu. But he's being trained by the commandant to view people who aren't aligned with their group as just these faceless evil monstrosities that deserve a violent death.
And he gets one.
So when he gets a very violent death, Agu listens, and he hacks this man to death with a machete, and it's horrible to watch. Again, not super graphic. There's some blood, but it's not like,
no. Most of the terror and like the disturbing elements are down to the performances from everyone involved, but particularly from Agu and the commandant. We haven't mentioned it yet, but there is a running voiceover throughout the film, and that's Agu. And I don't know how you feel about voiceover in film. Sometimes I think it works really well. Yes. Sometimes I think it's a little hackneyed and probably should have been cut. I think it works well in this film, though.
Yeah, I feel about the same way. Yeah, it's like a case-by-case basis for me, and I think it was well done here.
It was, and the reason I thought of it and thought to bring it up is that throughout the film, leading to this moment, Agu has been, talking to God off and on. And after he kills the man, he says something in the voiceover to the effect of, "Are you seeing this, God? I just killed a man. Like, why are you not stopping this?"
Yeah, that's rough. A lot of it is...
like, it makes it so much worse. Because it's like even the murderer isn't happy. No one's happy.
It's just a terrible... I mean, and that's what war is. It's a terrible outcome for all involved. The only people who enjoy it are...
yeah, the only people that enjoy it or get anything out of it are the people at the top.
Yeah, the people at the top or the people who are brainwashed. And it's just a... I mean, it's, again, as we've stated, it's a very powerful indictment of the mentality and circumstance of war, which I would, hasten to add, again, while this film is set in an unspecified country, these types of things, this is what makes it most painful for me, these types of things are happening right now in the world, in actual places to actual human beings, and that's just an appalling thought.
Yeah, it is really terrible. I will go out on a limb and say I think this is one of, if not the best, war film ever made.
I would rank it up there with what I've seen. It's hard for me to pick a best, but...
It's hard, yeah, but I think the power of it is that it goes from all angles. So you get to see Agu as a civilian. You get to see Agu as a soldier. Agu later on as a reformed soldier. You get to see what, like, the joyous, I hesitate to say joyous, the triumphant moments with the commandant, and the camaraderie and the legitimate, the battles against the actual armies that they win.
Yeah,
but then you also get to see the commandant murdering someone who's going to take his place in the
hierarchy.
In the hierarchy, yes, and then you see him molesting children, and it's just, it doesn't
flinch,
shy away from showing you how terrible war is.
Yeah, but it looks beautiful.
But that's the thing, is it's so beautifully shot, and I didn't actually realize that Fukunaga was his own director of photography on this.
He was, I think, his first time, and wow, he does a good job.
Yeah, because what's wild to me is, like, it looks like a professional, and, granted, he's a director and he's had, a couple other things, but, like, it looked like a professional cinematography job, and it's like, and he's the director, and...
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't always happen. In fact, I actually Googled people who are their own directors of photography, and there's not many people that will be director and cinematographer on the same film.
No. Yeah, the only one I can think of is Paul Thomas Anderson, and he's only done that once. So it's a rare phenomenon. But he does so good. I mean, it's from the opening shot, which is with the TV frame, right? It's around the children playing.
Yeah.
And it pulls back. I mean, it's just beautiful to look at. I think it's a grim moment, but I think one of my favorite moments has to be when Agu takes Brown, which is some sort of amphetamine or drug to...
It's some sort of drug.
Yeah.
And it just... one thing that Fukunaga does really well are tracking shots. Like, he will have these amazing tracking shots, and I'm sure he slipped some cuts in there, but it's done fairly masterfully. Like, it's nothing really obvious.
Pretty seamless. But the thing I really liked about it was that as they're marauding in this village, the color scheme suddenly, like, changes to from the natural, like, greens and oranges and browns of this village and field to this, like, hyper saturated pinks and purples. And it's like magic when it happens. I mean, it's a dark scene, but just to see this, like, glow come over everything suddenly, it's so beautiful visually.
It is really, and it's such a harsh scene too. I mean, it's an amazing tracking shot. You follow him, Agu, as he basically, the scene I'm thinking of in particular is he's, like, storming a house or a building.
Oh yeah.
And you follow them up the stairs. They go into a room. There's a mother and her daughter. Agu is clearly just super messed up on drugs, and he thinks it's his mom. And so initially he's like, Mom, and then he kind of snaps out of it and realizes it's just a random woman, and just, like, starts screaming and, like, runs to a window, starts, like, picking people off. And
then, also when he's coming up the stairs, just knocking over all of this furniture, and it's just one, like, it's almost like the camera is recoiling from him. It's very, very, like, I don't know, driven and dramatic tracking. He just does it. He does it exceptionally well.
That's why it is one of my favorite films, but it's a very hard film I've said this before. It's a very hard film to get people on board with because when you tell them the plot, they instantly are like, why would I want to watch that? And you're like, oh, now I seem like a monster because
Yes.
I'm like, this movie's great, but it's great because it shows the horrors of war. Like, it's basically a horror movie.
Yeah. The thing that I've experienced is that when somebody tells me to watch a movie like this, it sounds great, but then I never find myself like wanting to watch it on the day of, if that makes sense. Like, oh, Sean recommended this great
No, I hear you.
movie about African child soldiers to me that sounds really interesting. And then like it's Wednesday and I'm like, I guess I should watch that. But then you're just you're just gonna be horribly depressed.
It's not like the new James Bond where you're like, oh, cool, this is going to be fun, maybe. Or, like the new Avengers or whatever, comic book movie or action. Like, it's not fun.
No, it's not fun. But there is a lot to, again, enjoy is the wrong word, but there's a lot to take from it.
Yeah, but you can get a lot out of the film, even though it is about this terrible stuff, because it is so beautiful to watch. And if you can divorce yourself, which I find myself every once in a while doing, you can't help it. It's a movie. It's not real. Just watching, shots and framing and the soundtrack and all, you just get lost in it. In the artistry.
Yeah, and actually I did quite like the score now that you bring it up. Very immersive, atmospheric. Honestly, the craft of it as a whole is impeccable. The editing too, it's just so sharp and purposeful, and it's a wonderful film to watch as a film, not as not investing. If you're just a film student and you're just watching it for the technical aspects of it, it's remarkable. But I wouldn't suggest entirely divorcing yourself from it because...
No, you can't. What I mean is there will be moments when I'm rewatching it that I will be able to distance myself, but I'm never able to entirely distance myself from the plot because the script is really, I haven't read the book. It's based off a book, but I don't know, the dialogue and just the beats, it's well crafted and it draws you in despite the fact that it's about this terrible, terrible stuff.
Yeah. And for those who are maybe averse to watching movies like this normally, there is something to be learned from terrible experiences and terrible emotions, even though, we may not always want to subject ourselves to them in movies. And two, I do think it is very generous and humane in its own way. And it really feels for its characters and its story in a way that I can't say many films I've seen about war do, because it's too easy to either focus solely on the brutality and the violence or create something that's sentimental or like kitschy. But this film, it does both in the sense that it has that violence and that weight to it, but it also has a real, at its core, a kind of a tribute to the human spirit that, it's always a beautiful thing to experience that in a film.
One of the most powerful aspects of the film is Agu's journey, and he goes from an innocent little child to probably one of the I hesitate to use, I was going to say badass. That's not the right term because that glorifies it. But, just like a very adept child soldier who is fine with murdering people.
Like a hardened killer almost.
Yeah. So he goes from an innocent child to a hardened killer. And then by the end of the film, and I guess we should go back into the plot summary, but he's picked up, I believe, by the UN.
Yes.
And he surrenders, and since he's a child, they let him go. They're not going to charge him with war crimes, I guess. And then he's just he's basically an orphan at this oceanside facility.
In that whole last part is very beautiful, but perhaps my favorite scene in that portion of the film is his conversation with his therapist, or rather not a conversation, but she's asking him questions about his experience and, obviously trying to figure out if he has any sort of PTSD or mental illness as a result. And his internal monologue, this is one of the most well-deployed sections of narration, I think. He says something along the lines of, she's talking to me like I'm a child or a baby, but I'm like an old man, and she's like a little girl, because I've seen war and I've killed people, and she doesn't know anything about war. And that's so, I mean, especially, it's heartbreaking coming from a child, but it's so resonant and powerful in that moment to hear this person condescending to him and trying to reach out to him. And meanwhile, we've just experienced with him all of this horrible bullshit that he's had to go through. And he's like a war-worn soldier, like a hardened soldier with his battle scars at the end of the film.
He does open up, and it's one of the more powerful monologues, I think, in the entire film. So he says something to the effect of, if I tell you what I've done, you will think that I'm a beast. But I have a mother, and I had a father and a brother. And he basically says, I've done the most horrible things a person can do, the worst things imaginable, but I'm a human being, and I have a mother and a father, and I'm just like you in my way.
It's very poignant. And then in the ensuing scene, we're really just describing the end of the film at this point, so whatever, but the final moments where he's on the beach and he's been apart from these other kids who have gone through the same thing as him. His whole time at the facility, he hasn't been socializing or fraternizing in any meaningful way. But at the end, they're jumping around in the surf in the ocean, and he joins them after a few moments of hesitation. And that's the beating heart of the film. His ability to, I don't want to say resilience, because he should never have been put through this or anything.
No, but he does. It's basically a film about the triumph of the human spirit, as weird as that sounds. And it's a wonderful ending, because you can see him as Agu, the child soldier, standing on that beach, staring at these children, just playing and being children.
Yeah.
And you can tell that he's sort of like, how can I even do this? Like, I've been through so much. Like, I don't know that I can. And you can see him slowly just go, fuck it. Like, I'm going to be a child again. Like, I need to just forget about this as best I can.
Yeah. And to keep living.
And he runs off and he plays. Yeah. Like, because, it's like he's still alive. He's a child. Like, he's what, 12?
He's very young. I don't think we get an exact age, but he's a child. Yeah. He needs space to be a child and to have that innocence, which, you would think all of this would have taken it away from him completely, but he still finds room in himself at the end to join this. I just find it very beautiful, like a tearjerker almost.
It really is.
And that's something that really, I know I mentioned this film earlier, but it really does separate it from something like Come and See, which is also a great war film. But in a film like that, it's the utter obliteration of the human spirit. Like, there's nothing left in that child at the end of the movie. He's literally like a husk of a human being. Whereas this film, despite, again, its intensity and its bloodshed and its pain, still holds out faith for Agu in the end and gives him dignity and believes that, despite the trauma, he'll somehow find a way forward. And that's something that I think is honestly flat out rare in film in general.
It is very rare. Psychologically, this film puts you through a lot. It makes you watch a child's family get murdered. It makes you watch this child become indoctrinated
into an extremist,
into a civil war. It makes you watch this child who has been brainwashed and is on drugs and has been the victim of sexual abuse, going around just popping people left and right, like not even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then by the end, it brings you back to the child that he was at the very start of the film. And you realize, oh yeah, this kid is 12.
Yeah, and that child isn't gone.
And he's still there. He was just, he had to a certain extent, it's not his fault. We see left and right the options of the soldiers that don't perform. Like, there's a ritual near the middle, I think, of the film, where it's the new recruits are basically, these children are given some sort of hallucinogen, I think.
Yes.
And they're made to, like, basically lie in a hole in the ground so they can be reborn, right? And then they have to run through this group of soldiers who just beat them with a stick.
Yeah, and
we see one fall over, and they immediately take that one, put him to the side, and slit his throat. So it's like he really would have died if he hadn't done this.
He's captive of his circumstances. And I would also point out those rituals are very interesting because, you know, they don't serve any tactical purpose or training purpose. Burying him alive, you know, it's not going to make him a better soldier. It's a way to break his spirit. It's a way to just try and utterly indoctrinate and brainwash him into this group. But they fail. And that's why, I mean, like, despite all of this horrifying abuse, like every example of like the worst abuse imaginable on a child, the child is still there at the end. And that's why, again, it's a painful and grueling experience. But I ultimately, this is maybe the wrong word, but I want to say I ultimately felt it was like a weird uplift.
No, it does. In many ways, I feel like it's more uplifting than a film that wouldn't make you go through such a hell.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I mean, like, this is like Dante's Inferno. Like, you're watching somebody literally walk through hell and then leave.
Yeah. It demonstrates that a person can be put through the most extreme type of peril and still survive, albeit like maimed and traumatized by what happened to them. That even in the worst of circumstances, some sort of humanity can survive. I mean, I think about his relationship with that other child soldier. I forget his name now. A Striker.
Yeah.
He doesn't speak. But I think of the scene after he's been molested by Idris Elba's character. He's crying and he's out by himself, and Striker comes over and hugs him because you get the sense that this has happened to him as well. And there's this, despite the awful horror of the situation, there's this beautiful moment of empathy between these two kids, and you see them not as soldiers or as radicalized citizens, but as just two children just sharing a moment of empathy and connection with each other. And that's another through line of I'll just say heart or compassion. We see Agu and Striker form this bond, and then there's this really heartbreaking scene near the end where Striker reveals that he's taken a bullet. Like, it looks like it's through the lung. Yeah. And
Agu just isn't willing to, despite all his indoctrination, all the people he's killed, all the horrible stuff, he's not willing to let Striker he's not willing to leave him. So he literally puts him on his back.
Yeah.
And marches with this kid until he realizes that the child has died while he's been marching with him on his back.
Carrying him. Yeah. I mean, it's that we're using the word heart too much. It's that strain of humanity that keeps you going through the film, I think. It's those little windows of, I mean that's kind of similar to what we talked on our episode 5 about No Country for Old Men, in that there's this brutal nihilism and purposeless violence surrounding all of these characters, but there's still some, I don't want to say hope, but some redeeming quality that just provides like a...
there's like for lack of a better term, there's a spirit. And Agu's spirit
is strong.
Is very... And in many ways, you discover that he is actually braver, more courageous, and has more spirit than the Commandant himself. One of the last scenes is the Commandant has basically gone rogue. And he's forcing the soldiers to, like, I think they're just trying to find gold or something. They're digging in the earth, looking for gold because they've run out of money. They're not being funded anymore.
Yeah.
Then they're running out of supplies.
Out of ammunition. They're all...
out of ammunition. So one of the fellows...
they're sick.
Yeah, they're getting sick. And one of the fellow soldiers asks Agu to go talk with the commandant, and there's this really, it's one of the more striking visuals in the film in terms of just the complete transformation of Agu from a child into just a hardened soldier. He puts on his helmet, he grabs like a joint, he lights it up, and he's just like walking, like he's just like smoking this cigarette in his mouth while he's walking through this like knee-deep mud. Like a trench, like a World War I trench almost.
Except, again, cinematography, this kind of spectacular, like ruddy orange color that gives it an almost surreal, it's like hell is what it looks like.
Yeah, it really is. And he's just like walking through it like it's nothing, like smoking this joint, like with a rifle in his hand.
Dead people all over the place, vomiting.
Dead people all around him, seeing his fellow soldiers getting sick and vomiting. And he goes up to the commandant and asks for bullets, and the commandant is just being basically a crazy person. He's like, we're going to get through this, we're going to keep going. And finally the rest of the soldiers are like, we don't have bullets. How are we supposed to have an army? We can't fight without ammunition.
Yep.
And they all turn on him and go, you know what, screw this, we're gonna leave.
This is so stupid.
There's this showdown between Agu and the commandant, where Agu points his rifle at the commandant, and the commandant in turn, this is when you see just how truly terrible he is. He puts a handgun to his temple. I mean, like, it's a literal child going up against a full-grown man in a shootout.
And the child wins.
And he doesn't back up either. You can tell that he's like, if you're going to kill me, just kill me.
But it demonstrates, I mean, think about that, though. The fact, it demonstrates that Agu is a stronger spirit than the commandant. I've been mispronouncing it all episode. Commandant. That he has the strength to face somebody like that and walk away, whereas meanwhile the commandant, his only strength is in numbers, and as soon as that army leaves, he's just alone and scared and gonna starve to death.
I mean, in a really weird way, by the end of the film, it's shown that the commandant is much more of a child than Agu is, who is an actual child.
Yep, he's petulant, he's greedy, he's like possessive and controlling, and he's just, I mean, like, he throws tantrums, honestly.
He does. He finds out that the 2IC, I'm not really sure what that means in terms of the ranking, but basically his second in command, he finds out that he's being ordered to make a second in command become first in command. He's going to have to step down.
And he just can't take it.
And he orchestrates this really ridiculous, like, okay, so he makes them all go to this
brothel.
And he stages it. It's heavily implied that he just walks in and shoots the guy and then stages it like one of the prostitutes did it so that he can kill them and be like, oh man, there's no evidence now.
Yep. Those prostitutes, so motivated and, and it's like, it's an obvious sham when it happens.
I mean, the 2IC, he literally says, you shot me. But he's, Idris Elba, or the commandant, is just screaming his head off because he knows if anyone talks to this guy at length, they're going to realize, like, oh no, the commandant just shot him, huh?
Yeah,
and went against a direct order. This man who spent the whole movie talking about orders and duty.
As soon as he's given an order, can't take the order. I mean, in that way, he is very much like a dictator or a cult leader, in that, honestly, his only strength is the volume of his voice in the ears of the people around him. Like, that moment where he's literally shouting down dissenting opinions and accounts. It's just a representation of his whole deal, is that he's only strong as long as he can be the loudest voice in the room. And as soon as his little militia realizes what's up, they just flat out abandon him, and he is no clout.
And I think that is an important scene, and I'm glad that it's one of the final scenes, because it gives you...
Yes.
In many ways, it gives you a sort of catharsis.
Yeah.
It kind of gives you the closure you need in terms of just this man, seeing him just completely abandoned. Like, he deserves far worse, but... He, at least, the people that he has had around him who have been lifting him up and giving him so much power that he's been abusing, they finally realize, we don't have to take this anymore. You're ridiculous. We're done.
I mean, honestly, he's almost a comical figure in those last scenes, despite the terrible things we've seen him do. He just looks foolish and sad at that point.
To mention Apocalypse Now again, he's like... and I'm going to blank on the name, but the the character that they spend the whole movie in Apocalypse Now going to find, Marlon Brando's character, he's like the opposite of that. Because he's the one that goes rogue that like loses all his power. Whereas in Apocalypse Now, that character has all the power. Like he's gone rogue and just like has this massive army behind him. And this is the opposite. As soon as the Commandant in Beast of No Nation goes rogue, everyone abandons him and he runs out of resources.
Yeah, I mean, he just looks ridiculous at that point that he's giving these orders to a militia that no longer belongs to any organized purpose or cause. He isn't that strong. He needs the bedrock of a movement or a cause in order to exert his control. And as soon as they're forced out of any side, any type of organized body, it just falls apart completely. And that shows his fundamental weakness, is that he can't protect his men. He can't sustain the cause or the motivation for their group.
It's a pivotal moment in the film because you realize he's all talk and he has always been all talk. He's not really the one that's going into battle, that's risking his life, that's like being, I hesitate to say courageous. Well, I guess that, it doesn't matter that the cause is completely ridiculous and that they're killing innocent people. Like, these children are very brave. They're like risking their lives every day going into firefights.
Yes. I mean, it shows just how, again, weak he is. He's a weak link to found a group on. Because as soon as he doesn't have a greater force to back him up, you just see him as honestly, like just like a big mouth who's just ordering all of these people around without doing any of the actual heavy lifting and filled with like a sense of, I don't know, megalomania, but he doesn't actually wield any significant power at all. I really like that scene where they all turn their backs on him, like it's like almost like a breakup or the end of an abusive relationship. They just collectively,
I mean, it is, on the second watch, he seems very much like a pimp. Like he goes after vulnerable young people to force them into doing things for his profit.
It's a very similar phenomena to pimps, to cults, to dictatorships, to all of anything based around a central charismatic personality.
And it's usually, if not always, they go after vulnerable people. They go after people that have lost their parents, people that are addicted to drugs.
People who are rootless, who are looking for some sort of purpose, who, often justifiably have been wronged and are looking for a way to vent their anger. But he just channels that in a really toxic and destructive direction. And that, so that is, it is very much like a cult mentality in this group.
And again, it's a testament to the strength of Elba's performance because he is such a charismatic person. And he is usually such a charming actor that even when he plays these terrible people, you still can't help but be like, oh, well, you want to like him. But in this, I would argue, more so than any of his other roles, even his role as Omar in The Wire.
You can't.
Yeah, you just really don't like him. You just think he's a...
I would contest that. I would say his role in Cats is some of the most depraved evil I've ever seen.
Okay. I mean, I'll give you that. I haven't been strong enough to watch it yet.
That's something you'll have to endure and prevent yourself from flinching while watching it.
I mean, I am sure. But I think we're getting to the end of the episode. So I guess, what are your final thoughts on Beast of No Nation?
I highly recommend this. And even if you think it may be too dark for you, I would suggest giving it a shot because it is beautifully made and acted on the one hand, but also it tells a story that has been told many times because it always has relevance, but it tells it with great sensitivity and humaneness despite the brutality. It's on your side, actually, is what I would say. It's a movie that understands you're going through this experience with the character and wants you to come out of it a better person.
I would also highly recommend this film. It is, in its way, very humane. there are many war films that they either show the horrors of war or they glorify it. And there are a few I can think of that do both. And do both so well, but then also have a human element, that also have a character that you can just get behind, even when they're doing the worst stuff imaginable. It's a brilliant film. And I think it just proves to me that Cary Fukunaga is a very slept-on artist and creator. I mean, he gets his credit for True Detective Season 1, but even then, he sort of, people think it's Nick Pizzolatto, and they're like, Nick Pizzolatto's True Detective, but if you watch that first season, it's so much better than the next two. And the one common element is Cary Fukunaga directed all 8 episodes. I'm pretty sure he script doctored, and he might have even again been his own director of photography. I'm not entirely sure, but a lot of the tracking shots in particular seem very similar.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen anything else that I know of that Fukunaga has worked on.
He did a show for Netflix called Maniac that I don't know
I heard about that
many people have seen, but that's another show I would highly recommend. I know that this is a film podcast, so we're not really going to discuss shows unless we're doing something for our Patreon, which will be coming soon, by the way. We're going to have mini episodes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think he's a powerful filmmaker. He's doing the new Bond. I'm going to watch it. I'm not sure if it's going to be amazing. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not really his fault, though. He's doing the 5th installment of a Daniel Craig Bond series. So it's there's only so much you can do with that.
Yeah. It seems a little limiting.
I think it will look pretty.
Yeah. I mean, I've read portions of his unproduced screenplay for It, and I just wish that had been the version they went with.
Yeah, it would have been so much, people loved it as it came out, but it's so harsh when it's like reading about what Guillermo del Toro was going to do with The Hobbit.
Oh, and then the actual Hobbit.
And then seeing the actual Hobbit and seeing the parts that are all Guillermo del Toro and realizing that's the only reason that film was in any way good. Yeah. It's the same thing, I think, with It, where a lot of the strength I think was on the backbone of Cary Fukunaga's early script.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I saw it and I was like, oh, that was pretty decent. The kids are good actors, had fun, entertaining.
Right, but then when you go to part 2, it's so much worse, right?
Oh yeah, part 2 is abysmal and it's one of the worst movies.
The major difference I can think of is part 1 had Cary Fukunaga working on it.
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, oh, it was entertaining, it was a fun ride. And then I read the Fukunaga script and I'm like, if this had been made, we might have a contemporary classic. What we have is amusing and entertaining or whatever. But if that script had been made, it would have been, unbelievable. Some of the stuff in there is really striking and powerful, and I'm angry that they cut it. Even more so now that I've seen his work as a director and know how talented he is.
I think the good news is now that he's got a Bond film, he's basically going to be able to print money.
Yeah.
I think he's going to get to do whatever he wants. Hopefully. I'm not entirely sure of this, but hopefully he gets to do whatever he wants. And hopefully he can make another brilliant film like Beasts of No Nation and I'll cap the episode. Or does cap mean end?
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, I'll cap the episode with this. I'm going to cut that part out too. Let's just pretend I didn't say that part. I'm going to cap the episode with this. When this film came out, it's a Netflix original film, one of the first. And I think it got robbed of any kind of awards because it was one of the first Netflix films. I think if this film had come out last year, it would have been an Oscar contender easily.
Oh yeah, I would agree.
And I think by rights it should have at least been nominated. But then you get into the politics of the Academy, and they still don't want to be given any credit to the streaming services because that's basically their competition and destroying,
Yeah.
the film-going experience. But
yeah,
I really think, in my heart of hearts, this should have won something.
I agree. I think it was... I don't know what else was nominated that year, but this is easily... it's one of the best films I've seen of the past decade, certainly. And it does belong in the canon of all-time great war films. So I mean, we've praised Netflix before or whatever, and I don't want to get into a habit of doing that. But yes, I agree. It should have been represented, and it is a shame that it wasn't.
It is a shame that it wasn't, but again, much like this film, finding the moments of levity, now that he has this big studio film, maybe people will go back and watch Beasts of No Nation, and I do believe that this film will have a very long life. I feel like even if
shelf life, yeah.
Even if it ends up, I don't think they would take. Well, then we get it. I don't know what the future for Netflix is. Like, do they take movies down?
I don't think they do. Their whole.
I don't think that. But then it's like, do they do DVD or Blu-ray releases? Well, that could be a whole other episode. So let's not get into that.
We won't. I would say that some of their more artsy films are getting Criterion releases because.
Okay, so that's good to know at least.
Netflix wants to draw those cinephiles. So I hope that this eventually gets, a proper release on like DVD or Blu-ray with all the bells and whistles. But until then,
if it's possible, I think that it will. Yes.
Until then, give this man money and watch this movie.
And with that, I'm Sean M. Thompson.
I'm Brian O'Connell.
And thank you for listening to Celluloid Citizens.
Thank you.
Okay, good.